Hello, everyone. For those who are watching, welcome. My name is Jordan. I am a curator for J-Chair Presents, and I have the privilege and pleasure of talking with William Paul Thomas. William, thank you so very much for being here. How are you holding up today?
Thanks for chatting with me, Jordan. I'm doing pretty well. It's a good day. It's warm outside. It's sunny, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Good, good. So, without further ado, I kind of want to get right into it. This is a conversation I'd like to have with you, if you will, over this exhibit, Dual Diagnosis. It's in partnership with several organizations and particularly around mental health. And so, once I was approached and was asked to curate this exhibition, and the theme was to keep it around mental health, particularly for men of color and Black men. And I immediately thought of you. I thought about our meeting. I forgot how long ago it was. You were in a show at the Nasher, and they had this huge exhibit, and I knew like half the artists there. And your cyanosis series took up like this whole wall. And I remember us having kind of an impromptu, like, recorded session for something that you were doing on your platforms around mental health and particularly like Black men being able to open up and like express that they need help or express the stressors that they experience and affect their mental health is what I understood. And so from that angle, I see your work, that series speaking on this exhibit, but I kind of wanted to hear it from you and go in a deeper dive. So, how does your work, particularly in cyanosis, how does that touch on the subject of mental health from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So I was really grateful for the opportunity that we had to have that conversation back in, I think, 2022 was when that Reckoning and Resilience show at the Nasher was. So I've been having lots of reflective conversations about this series over the years, and one thing I sometimes have to remind myself of, or a realization that I've had, is that a lot of the work that I've made over the years, even when it starts out as this kind of external reflection or external observation, uh, tends to stem from my own personal experiences, even when I haven't really identified that from the start. So I think cyanosis is like that, where I know that I have grown up with family and friends and a community that I don't always take advantage of the opportunity to dialogue with them about what I got going on, to talk with people, to share, to express. And so I think these series of paintings where men have their faces painted half blue initially started off as a way of me asking the viewer, where I would share these works, to sort of consider these men not just like their likenesses, but something was off about their likenesses. So that the fact that their faces were painted half blue, I hope would prompt the question for the viewers to question, um, yeah, why would someone's face be blue? So whether it's like it's turning blue or the blue is dissipating, however you see it, and considering that they're all Black men and boys, it was a way of introducing this element of questioning what's happening without me having to be there for the question to be asked. So I have a long history of painting portraits of people, tending to emphasize just their natural skin color, as it is in the photo reference that I take of them. And I realized for those years just painting these sort of naturalistic portraits that often I'd have these really deep, meaningful conversations about race, about the portrait subject. But that was when I was present, and so I had this dilemma of how do I ask these questions about how we see the subjects in these paintings without me always having to be standing there to talk to the people that are looking at the paintings. So my sort of solution to that was to introduce this feature of changing the color. And in my mind, although blue has all these kind of myriad associations with it. The first thing that occurred to me with the first painting I made, it was of my nephew Michael, and his face is the top half of his face was painted this bluish color, but it was more of a gray blue, kind of almost like a deadening of his skin. And so right away, the start of the series became this thought about how much does this conversation about race or this experience about race sort of flatten one's experience in the world to where race becomes so much topic of discussion that we ignore other aspects of the person's identity, right? So when I'm sharing a portrait of Mikey somewhere, especially a place that might be predominantly white, I think from my experience talking to some of the viewers, there's so much emphasis on him being this beautiful little black boy, and really kind, thoughtful reflections. You know, when people talk to me out loud about what they see in him, but I think I personally have this preoccupation with wondering if what I was hearing was this sort of separating Mikey from just the human experience. Like, yeah, he's this beautiful black boy. I'm seeing, you know, some of the thoughtfulness or the depth in representing his eyes. But I think what I would, maybe this could be totally a projection, was that the viewers were tending to sort of not think of him as a whole person. Like that his experience of being this little black boy, that there was only a certain amount of um how do you say mirroring that they might experience in terms of thinking that their emotional experiences or life experiences could be reflected in this kid. And so my experience is, you know, one of the really critical moments in my life, or like a critical turning point, was when I moved from Chicago, Illinois to Beloit, Wisconsin when I was 11 years old. And in Chicago, my community was predominantly black. So my church family, my peers at school, the white people that I interacted with the most were like the teachers. I went to a Catholic school, so like the clergy that taught classes, that was the most time I spent around like white folks. But when I moved to Beloit, now I was a minority, right? And so I think that turning point in my life has made me sort of hyper focus on what it means to be a black man, a black boy in spaces, in any space, but particularly if I'm a minority or and it's a majority white um, environment. I'm wonder how I'm perceived, and I also feel maybe unsafe, or I feel uncertain about if I belong in those places. And so using these portraits as a way of kind of like pointing to the unspoken experiences that we have of showing up in all the places that we do in the world and having these internal thoughts, feelings, experiences that we might not often get to say out loud because it might not be, maybe we think it won't be welcome. We don't know if people can handle the experiences that we have to share. We maybe don't even know how to fully articulate, you know, what we're experiencing. But if you would just pay attention, if you could ask folks to pay attention to the sort of natural sort of complexion, but now introducing this aberration, how might it ask you to sort of like stop and pause and consider like why that might be happening? So it became like a way of like introducing this metaphor of everybody that you encounter, black men included, is dealing with some internal thing that they may or may not ever like say to you out loud. And what does it mean to sort of consider that when you interact with humans? Period, is to know that yes, you'll meet people that are gregarious, smiling, happy, confident, and all of those positive traits that people might have doesn't necessarily negate the fact that they have like some internal experiences that complicate their lives.
Great, that's rich. You definitely answered my next question. So I kind of want to do a slight pivot from it. The next question was going to be what inspired you to make this work in particular? And so I'd like to pivot by saying, what direction is your work taking you now?
Ancestry. I'm obsessed with um, finding out things about my roots, my immediate family, our history. And I have a daughter, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I was sort of, I was really inspired by the fact, this realization once I finally had a child, that my daughter is the product of two people that have led two very different lives, and that she inherits that in so many different ways, not just genetically, but socially, environmentally. She's a product of us. And I think when that clicked for me, us having her, I started paying attention to it for myself and for everybody. Is that like, what does that mean to sort of be a child of two parents that have led two different lives, and now you're the embodiment of that, that combination, that meeting, between those two people, for better or for worse, or not even better or worse, just like the complexity of that, the depth of that is really fascinating to me. So I'm in the middle of processing all of these things, both like finding family records related to my own family history, but also just having lots of conversation with family members to kind of unpack like who we are and how we got to where we are.
And that's kind of where my ending thoughts are. And so I know we can keep going on. I meant to try to keep this short, and I sincerely appreciate it. I guess what are your final thoughts around this topic, especially around like the need for us to not be silent about our mental health? Maybe that's a good place to end on.
But thank you. I feel like there's a looming question for me right now about like, what does it mean to share as much information as we can about what we have going on internally and still feel like we are protecting whatever sense of safety and privacy that we need, right? Like, so how do we find these safe spaces to talk to have hard conversations, and not just with our therapists, right? For those of us that have therapists, like I've recently been having tough conversation with family members and wondering like if all of us are seeking out the opportunity to dialogue with family about with hard topics. And so I think that's my question. My unanswered question is related to the importance of having a dialogue with our loved ones about the things that are hard to discuss. I think that's a really critical question to present to that I'm grappling with, and that I would present to anyone listening to our conversation is, can you find that space? Do you need to find that space? And what do you need to do to release and to still fully own your story, but find a place to have an outlet to dialogue about the things that are important to you?
Thank you for that. I do feel the need to also add on to that, because I often hear about, at least from my anecdotal experience, of course, there's stigma and sort of internalized trauma or stigma against being open and vulnerable and seeking help. I also think it's important to acknowledge the access people have, because I think, like what you said, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think you said like even affording a therapist, and so that just made me think about, in many ways, it's still considered a privilege to even afford a therapist. And I think that can also be a barrier that keeps people from opening up and discussing or having the hard conversations. And so what you're talking about, these alternative ways to still provide that opening, I think I feel the need to share like the challenge of access also kind of further flavors that dynamic a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for what you do and the work that you're doing. I can't wait to see more. I kind of want to do a shout out because I think you're doing something at Ackland, was it?
At the Horace Williams House. So that's actually where we're recording right now. So June 6th, next Saturday, it'll open from 2 to 4 will be the reception, and then it'll be up from June to July. Horace Williams House in Chapel Hill.
All right, Horace Williams House in Chapel Hill. I'll make sure to visit this summer. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan.